All right, guys. So today we're just going to do a quick kind of introduction to Rhino, just to kind of get your feet wet and acclimated to the environment. Now, when you first open Rhino, this is kind of what you should be looking at or what you should get. There's sort of four different viewports: top, front, right, and a perspective viewport. Before you do anything, the first thing I always check is that to check the units that the file is set to. So if you just type directly into your keyboard units, you'll see that whatever you type pops up on the upper left in this command line, right? And just enter or spacebar. Then you'll see it by default. Whenever Rhino opens a new file, the units are actually set to millimeters, right? So you can change this, in your case, to inches or feet. We'll do inches for now because I'm assuming that we're kind of modeling a smaller thing, right, like a model. You can change this to feet and inches if you're kind of more used to architectural kind of display, right? Feet, inches kind of display with the requisite kind of precision level, quarter inch, half inch, 1/8, that sort of thing. I'm just used to decimal, so I'll just stick with decimal for mine and say okay. And nothing should change. It just means your units are now set to inches. So like 1 unit, right? It's a sort of abstract concept. 1 unit in this kind of virtual space equals 1 inch. Okay. Just a reminder that in digital, you should always be modeling at 1-to-1 scale at full size, so that if you're modeling a house, you're actually modeling what the real house, right, the size of the real house would be. So if something's 15 feet tall, you're actually drawing it and modeling at 15 feet tall in digital, right? Whenever we go to representation and we draw drawings at different scales, that's when we'll do the scaling. But in digital, everything should be at full size, 1-to-1. Okay, just so kind of remember that. Okay. Now, just to navigate around a little bit, I'm going to pop something in really quickly just so you see a little bit better. But I'm going to click on this icon on the left called the box, or you can just type in box if you want and spacebar or enter. And I'm going to make it sort of like this. Okay, just clicking on with my left mouse button. Now, all of you are going to need a mouse for this program, right? You're not going to use a trackpad. It's going to be hell for you guys to use trackpads for this. So you need a mouse that has left click, right click, and middle mouse button and a scroll, right? So a 3-button mouse with a scroll wheel ideally. That's all you need. You don't need any more buttons than that. Okay. So navigation. Left click is used to select things, right? So you select, you click out somewhere else outside to deselect, or escape deselects as well, right? That's what left click is for. Right click depends. If you're in one of these orthographic views, right, top, holding down the right mouse button and dragging it, the mouse moves you into panning mode. So it allows you to pan around. The scroll button zooms in or out, right? So you can zoom in or out, right? Now, this behaves a little bit differently in one of these 3D views. So the right click button actually rotates, right, you around a certain kind of rotation point or axis that you can set eventually. Zoom button still works the same way. To pan, you will have to hold down the shift key while you hold down the right mouse button as well simultaneously. So you're to be able to pan in the 3D view. Otherwise, it will only do rotation. So you add the shift key to pan. Okay, so that's really, really basic navigation, right? Now, I do want to do a couple settings here really quickly, just so that we're working on the same, kind of plane. If you go up to your tools, toolbar up here, tools, options, right? Or you can just type options, the same thing. You'll find a lot of these commands and the typed command all are interchangeable. So I'm going to go to the mouse option here, right? By default, your Rhino will have this default pop-up thing selected. And what that does when you click on the middle mouse button is pulls up this kind of useless contextual menu, right, which almost nobody uses. So again, go to tools, options, mouse. Click on this, run this macro, and change this to ZS like I have. Just type ZS into here and say OK. What that does is, and I will make another box somewhere else. further away. Okay. What this does is that actually when I select something, right, I have something highlighted or selected like this, like in yellow, and I click on my middle mouse button, it zooms me into the thing I selected and also resets the rotation pivot point to its sort of center of mass. So in this case, right, as you see, let's say if I'm kind of rotating things around, right, I'm rotating things, right, I select this and I use the middle mouse button to zoom select, then it sort of teleports me over there, right, and resets the rotation kind of center, right, to this thing over here. So it'll become handy, especially when we start navigating more complex scenes. This helps you kind of move around a bit more easily, okay? Now, selecting things. I can click on things singly to select. I can drag select, meaning using a crossing boundary like this, right? So you'll see, let me maximize this. This is maximize, minimize. Some people will have this set to something different, but I think my options are set to single click. For some of you, you might have to double click this to be able to do that. And you can maximize any of these viewports like if you want to, okay? So I think that's somewhere here in the options. I usually like set this once and then kind of forget about it. Let's see. General. Oh, here, under view, this single click maximize, that's the option. Sorry, I have to kind of hunt for it because usually you change it once and then you forget about it. So I'll maximize this so you can see better. So selecting, right, you can click on the upper left, drag to the lower right. This is a crossing selection, right? So anything that falls within that rectangle that I just drew, that's selected. So if I cross and I have both of the boxes within the selection, right, then both get selected. If I only go partially through one, right, so right now I completely have enclosed one, but only partially through the other, then it won't select the one that's only partially selected. Okay, so that's how this sort of, selecting multiple objects works. I can also use the shift key. So select 1, 2, right, to select more than one. Holding down the shift key allows me to multi-select. Holding down the control lets me to deselect from a selection set, right? So if I have both and I accidentally selected one and want to remove this one from the selection, holding down the control allows me to remove that one, right? Holding down the shift, again, allows me to add it back, okay? And that's just a single click, right? That's just with a single click. Although you can use crossing selections with it as well, right? So control, holding down control to deselect something, holding down shift, and crossing to select something, okay? So that's one direction. The other direction, going from lower right, is a crossing selection type. So anything, right, that we cross or we touch with the boundary of this rectangle will get selected. So you'll see, even though that only get to a partial crossing of this box, that selects it, okay? So it's just slightly different behavior. One needs to be complete overall, one just needs to touch it at any point and it will select it, right? Those are the couple selection modes that you'll probably come against. Now again, let's go back to tools options, right? So there are a couple options here I want to set for you, particularly underneath modeling aids. Just to kind of double check, like generally this is what yours looks like. In particular, I want to go to Smart Tracking Guides and enable Smart Tracking Guides. This Smart Ortho, Smart Tangents and Perpendiculars, Semi-Permanent Points. These guys should be on. If you go to Cursor Tooltips, turn on Osnap Distance Point. Right, the only one that's not on is the command prompt. Okay, so just make sure set your kind of Rhino settings to these as well, right? That'll just kind of make life easier for all of us, just so that your Rhino, when you're drawing things, behaves the same way that mine does. Okay. All right, so that's the sort of first big, just kind of being able to navigate around. So I'm going to show you a command called picture. So you just type picture, right? And you'll find a lot of these commands on the upper left. Like if you just start typing, it will actually bring up all, a lot of, for example, EX. So if I start EX, then it will bring up all the commands that start with EX, right? So it's a sort of like smart select, okay? This one, enter or spacebar. So here I'm going to bring in, and I'm going to assume, let's say that you guys have some diagrams, right? That may or may not look like this, that you are thinking of bringing in, okay? Into Rhino to work with, right? So I'm just going to select this one using the picture command, right? Open, and it will ask me to just plop it in, right? So first corner, I'll just pick a corner, and you'll see that it forces me to pick another size, right? So this is another size, just to get it into the Rhino interface, okay? So this is playing with your sort of scanned diagram there right now. Now, I have no idea how big this is, right? So I could do a distance query. So I type distance and just measure it, and it will tell me that this is about 54.7, almost 55 inches, right? But I want a more graphical way of knowing this, right? So let's say we were trying to fit these into, let's say a 12 or 15 inch square, okay? So the rectangle command here, right, is right there, or you can just literally type rectangle. Right, and it'll bring up these commands. You can click on it to execute it or enter, right? So click on one corner, and instead of clicking on the other corner arbitrarily, I'm actually going to type in 15, right? Enter for one end, and you'll see that's the width, right? And 15 for length, and then 15 again. So that basically has made a 15 by 15 square, right? Okay. So this I'm going to use as a size reference for scaling this down, okay? And you'll see that you can, I just like clicked and dragged it. So anything like this, right? If you click and you drag and you let go, right? That's a way to move it. You can move these things using this thing, which is called the Gumball. So this arrow, right? The red, green, and blue arrows, which is called the Gumball. It is this setting down here on the very bottom that toggles it on and off. So if it's off, then you won't see it. If it's on, then you'll see it. If you don't see it, then turn it on here. So you can move things by grabbing and click dragging on one of the arrows, right, in either direction, right? So the blue arrow moves vertically. So if I click and drag and let go, click, drag, let go, green arrow, same thing, right? I can also click on an arrow and actually put in a distance, so 25 inches. So they will nudge it in that direction, 25 inches. I can click on that, 10. It will nudge it up 10, right? So those are kind of pretty self-explanatory. You'll see these sort of planes in place there. These are actually there to say, oh, what if I only wanted to constrain my movement to the XZ plane, so the red and the blue kind of direction. So it's only moving in that plane. Now this is similar to if I had kind of gone out to one of these views, right, and said, oh, hey, I'm just going to move it around in the XY plane, right? I'm kind of shoving it around horizontally, right? That's what it would basically correlate to over here, right? If I'm moving it in the vertical plane, right, that's where how it would move, okay? So these are just constraining it to two directions instead of just one, right, but not the third, okay? So that just kind of helps explain that. These arcs are rotation arcs, right? So you can rotate things on a center axis using that if you want arbitrarily. As you're pushing and let's say dragging, right, the arc, if you hold down the shift, then it will snap to 90-degree angles, right? This is useful if you're trying to just flip it 90 degrees, turn it 90 degrees. Or of course, if you click on the arc and you put in 45 degrees, then it will move it 45 degrees. Control Z as normal, undoes stuff, right? If you select something and Control C, then it will copy it. Control V, paste it into the same place. You'll just get another duplicate, right, somewhere else, right? So you can do that. So Control C, Control V works generally as you think it does. Control X also, cuts and pastes back. Control V pastes back. So these generally work similar to how you think they would in like Word or any other kind of general program like this. Okay, now I'm going to want to scale this to roughly this size. Not exactly, but just roughly. Okay, so move, the command move itself has slightly different things than the moving kind of thing I just showed you guys. So move, if you type it, it will ask you to select which objects to move. So for example, write the diagram, enter, and then point to move from. Actually, I can specify which location I'm moving from. So in this case, I'm going to click on my lower left corner and say I want to match it to the lower left corner of the square. Okay, so this is how you can match points to points, right? That's the more explicit move command. And then I'm going to type scale. So scale, select object to scale. I'll pick the diagram itself and enter. And then base point, which base point to scale from, I'll pick this lower left corner again, right? And I can actually, you'll see usually a lot of these commands, you have to learn how to read things, right? They will have different options, right? So scale factor or first reference point. Let's say if it was a scale factor, I was guesstimating and I said, oh, I want to make 0.5, right? Meaning half the size. So I could just type in 0.5 and enter. And it'll shrink it to half the size, but it's still not fitting this, right? So instead of trying to guess, right, using numbers, I can run the scale command again. And you'll see that spacebar just kind of repeats the previous command. So if you're repeating the same command over and over, then just spacebar, it'll bring you back to the same command. Escape, right, basically escapes out of any sort of command or selection, okay? Anyways, let's run the scale command again. Select, right, the diagram, enter, base point or our lower left. Now we're going to give it a first reference point. So I'm going to go way out here to the lower right corner, click, and then you'll see that, oh, now I can match this, right, to a specific size, like that. Okay, so now I know like this is sitting perfectly within, right, the 15 sort of by 15 square that we want. Okay. All right, so those are a couple of things we went through, right? Units, rectangle, the picture command, scale, and move. One thing I will add about the picture command is that if you have, and let me turn on or open Photoshop. If you have a file, right, that has transparency in it, like this one, so this one, it's called transparent. I open up in Photoshop. Like this one, where we've basically deleted the white background, right? So you only have your, diagram markings on it. And this is saved as a PNG file, right? This is a PNG file, a file type that preserves, image transparency. Then when you import it into Rhino, it will preserve that transparency. So this is what I mean by that. So when I plop it in, you'll see that I can overlay it, put it over, right, the other diagram, and it will retain its transparency. That, okay? So it's transparent. This might be useful eventually when you, maybe are working with diagrams that you kind of want to see through a bit more easily, right? That you want to turn into something semi-transparent. Okay. All right. Now, I'm going to start by actually just teaching you guys how to draw a couple lines. So line, as you might imagine, is a way to draw lines, and you can draw them anywhere, right? There's just 2 points. You just give it 2 points, okay? Now, these are kind of all over the place, these lines. right? So what if I wanted to draw a straight line or a line that is orthogonal, right? So if you have the settings set to the same ones I have, right, then you'll find that when you snap to certain directions like here, right, where it's kind of parallel to one of the axes, it will snap to, right, that direction automatically, even though if you're slightly off. So just kind of learn that. This line, right, this is the X direction. This is the Y direction, right? So it just snaps to those directions automatically, okay? This is what I usually use. Some people don't like it or they make mistakes with it because it's really easy to like do one and like have it just like slightly off. And you'll see this much more clearly if you're in the top view like this, right? You'll see, oh, yeah, that's obviously not perpendicular, right? So you might actually think about drawing things in the top view, right? So if you draw a line and you kind of do this, then maybe it might be easier for you to see things, right? While you're drawing them, okay? Now, that's kind of one way of doing it. A second way is to turn on ortho. So up here on the lower left, on the bottom center, in this kind of tab here, if you click on the ortho sort of command, and you draw lines, then it will force you into orthogonal mode, meaning that you actually literally cannot draw anything that is diagonal in this mode. Okay, so that's if you have that on. If you have grid snap on, turn it off, right? This should be off. It'll kind of mess things up if you have that off, right? So you should check that your things are similar to what I have. Swipe track is on, Osnap is on, and we'll kind of explain that here in a little bit. Okay. All right. I want to introduce the concept of layers here. You may have more layers or not sure, but there always is going to be a default layer, depending on what kind of file you have open. But we'll make a new layer because it's always a good idea to organize your geometry into different layers to be able to more easily kind of control them. Okay. So what I'm going to do is click here. There's a new layer button right here, and I'll call this diagrams. Do that. Make another layer for it. Call this, let's say, lines, right? Make another layer and call this planes. Okay. We can change the colors of these by clicking on this little color swatch here. So the diagrams, we can change that to, let's say, gold or orange. Let's do gold. Okay. Lines, let's make these red so I can see them easily. Planes, let's make these, pink, whatever, just for fun. These are just kind of different layers, right? So I'm going to select my planes like this one, hold down the shift key, like this one, right? And move these to the diagrams layer, these diagrams actually, sorry. So you right click on it and say change object layer. And what you'll see is that, and it doesn't show up necessarily directly for these guys, but you can check by turning them on and off using this little light bulb icon. Right? If I show or hide them, that means these are on that layer now, okay? Now, all of the rest of these, right, these guys, all these lines, I'm just gonna select them, right, and then put them on the lines layer, right click, change object layer. They should turn red, right? Letting me know that, oh, they're on the red layer, okay? Now, another thing, you'll see this little check mark by the default, right? So that means this is the active layer. You can change your active layer by double clicking on any of these layers. So right now, anything I draw will be on the diagram layer. If I double click here, anything I draw will be on the lines layer. So if I draw any more lines, then they will all show up as red. I have my ortho on. I'm going to turn that off just because I don't like it. Okay. Now, let's double click on the planes. So make the planes the active layer, and let's put in, let's just practice putting some planes. Okay, so literally it is the plane command, and you can just click, right, and put a couple in here. Okay, so at the moment, right, these are surfaces, right, but they don't show up as surfaces because of the view style or the display mode we are in. So if you right click on the upper left where the perspective is, right, we are in what we're calling wireframe mode. So this is a sort of X-ray mode, right? So it actually doesn't show us. But if I switch it to shaded, then you'll see that planes start to have color, like they're filled in, okay? So this is just one of many view styles that you can kind of play with. Some of the common ones we'll look at are things like this, ghosted, X-ray. This will make more sense once you kind of have a bit more geometry in it. But for now, I'm just going to switch to shaded. Shaded is actually the view style that I work with the most, just because it kind of helps you see things a little bit better. Okay. So with that in mind, right, let's start to operate a little bit on this, on these kind of diagrams, right? So we know how to draw lines now, and we drew this out there. Maybe I'll just go to my top view, right? And I'll just kind of take this line and kind of slide it over somewhere, right? And you can do this in the top view, or you can do this in the 3D view, whichever you're more comfortable with, right? And I'm just kind of sliding this out. Okay, maybe this line right there, or maybe this corner right there. This means that I have some kind of big fold, right, that I want to do, right, on this diagram. So I'm going to show you two commands that are related. One that's called trim. Okay, so type trim, T-R-I-M. Select cutting object, so I'll use this line as the cutting object, enter. And then select objects to cut, meaning that, for example, if I want to cut my diagram right here, right, then I just cut it off, right? So it's like a scissors, except one side disappears, the other side gets deleted, right? So and we'll undo that, okay? So that's what trim does. And it can be helpful in example, like let's say, okay, I'm gonna scale this a little bit bigger. So scale, base point, reference point, scale larger like that, okay? And then I'm gonna try to center it a little bit more like this, okay? So I'm actually gonna use this time, trim. I'm gonna use this outer curve, the sort of square that we drew earlier, right, as the trimming object. And you'll see that when you have multiple things sort of overlapping on the same place, it will ask you to select, right? And it will highlight it, let you see which one. This is the curve that I'm selecting as the cutting object, enter, and then select object to trim. So I'll select the outsides of this diagram, so I can actually trim it down, right, to a perfect square, let's say, okay? So the next thing I'm going to do is split. So S-P-L-I-T, split. Select object to split. I'm going to split this diagram into two, right? Press enter. Select cutting object, so the line, enter. And so what it does is that it actually splits these two into two halves that I can separate now. Okay, so you could get fancier with this, right? For example, if I took this line, let me turn it 90 degrees, holding down the shift key, right? So it's 90 degrees. And let me like slide it somewhere else. Maybe, let's see, how about use this line? No. Yeah, how about this line over here? Okay. Right, so again, I can split, select object to split the diagram in the center here, right? Cutting objects, both of these lines, enter. What that does is it splits it right over there, okay? I'm actually not sure why I didn't split the very end over there, but you could do it separately if you wanted to, but in this case, at least it's split it into three different parts. That might mean that that line isn't exactly on the XY plane, okay? But what's nice or cool about this, right, is that I can now, for example, say I'm going to do a fold, and I'm going to turn this 90 degrees that way, okay? And then I'm going to use my move command, right, point to move from. Now, one thing you have to check here, right, when you're doing the move command, when using the point, go to your Osnap, right, down here on the lower left, here are some object snap kind of toggles, right? Make sure your Osnap is on. And in the toggles, at least you have the end toggle like I do have here now, right? So usually the end, the point, the mid, intersection, and perpendicular are the ones I have active. It's pretty versatile. but you can just move this corner, right? Click there and move it back. So this looks like as if you kind of folded, right? Cut and folded this sheet of Bristol, for example, right? I can do the same here with this guy. I can rotate that 90 degrees this way, right? Same thing, and then snapping to this corner and snap it back to where it would be, right? So this would be almost like a digital version of you taking a Bristol sheet of paper and kind of folding it up, right? Okay, so that's sort of fun. Right? Those are just lines. Okay, the next thing I'm going to show you is actually just what we did earlier with the box, right? With the box, I can come here, zoom in and say, okay, well, maybe I have some kind of volume, right? Which is this sort of darker space over here, right? And I want to start it here at this corner. I'm eyeballing this, right? If you're worried about that, you can also go switch into your top view, right? I'm in the middle of a command. You can switch views in the middle command just fine. So like trying to pinpoint it, oh, it's like right there. Okay, start it. I'm not sure where to end it, right? Because I don't want to overshoot. I want to just be kind of like right there on that line. So let me switch back to my perspective view. Just be careful you're not clicking outside. You're clicking on, right, the little words. Now, I know that that fold, right, that edge is on this red line. So I can turn on my near toggle. This near toggle in my Osnap actually basically magnetizes and makes my point to be on this red line, right? So you'll see that it kind of follows it, snaps to the line. So I can kind of zoom in and say, okay, well, I'll let my near snap guide me, but get me close to here, right? And okay, click, and then go upwards, right? Now upwards, I don't have much of a reference here yet, right? So I'll just kind of, pick one, something pretty close, right? And then you'll have a volume that matches kind of pretty much perfectly at whatever that was. Okay, so that's just the box command. So now you know how to make planes, right? Make planes this way. So the same thing, right? Plane, we'll go here, we'll just click on the corner, click on this corner, right? And it'll be made right there. I don't know if that's the kind of like the right location for it, right? So select the surface and you might actually kind of raise it or lower it. And if you're using something else for reference, then you can look at one of the other views, right? For example, right, I can use this view to align the plane to that line, right? And know that, okay, that actually is correlating to that line over there, for example, right? Okay. So those are kind of pretty cool and helpful things to know. Okay. Now, next thing with these is I want to show you the ExtrudeCrv command. So ExtrudeCrv, CRV, curve, select curve to extrude. Now this generally works on any old curve. So any line out here, right, like this one, right? When I extrude it, you might have slightly different settings. I have different toggles on, both sides is on, but you can basically make a giant plane, right? It will extrude out a giant plane in one direction or other, okay? But you can also use it on the edges of surfaces as well. So ExtrudeCrv, if I click on this edge of that surface, for example, right, and enter, then I can pull it up or down, right? So let's say this is kind of punching downwards, like through the bottom of this. So I'll just eyeball this, right, and say it go down this far, okay? So it's doing that, right? And then maybe again, and if stuff is in the way, right, like this, just kind of, just move it around, right? Need or I don't need that, I'll just delete it, okay? All right, so again, ExtrudeCrv, click on this, right? Now, this time, right, it's going down, right, which may or may not be the direction you wanted to go, but do notice that all of these commands have different options with them that you can experiment with. So this one, for example, has a direction command or a direction sort of subset. So I can actually tell it which direction I want to extrude. So in this case, I'm going to click there and then go in this, right, perpendicular direction. So it will go that way, right? And what's also nice is that actually when I'm going this way, right, because I've already constrained my extrusion to one direction, I can actually snap two things, right? Using my object snaps, and it will make it, in this case, like exactly the same length as what's above. Or I can snap it to this corner, and we'll make it exactly the same length right to there, right? Or you can just like arbitrarily end it anywhere you want. So this is kind of useful for that sort of stuff. Okay, cool. So that's the ExtrudeCrv command. All right. I want to touch on copying things a little bit. So let's say, you know, we're taking these lines, right? And we're trying to build out a linear framework. So you could like do the copy paste like we did before. However, the explicit copy command, so copy, right? Select objects to copy. This one actually allows me to pick an insertion point, right? So if I want to use this as the copy point or use this as the copy point, right? So for example, if I'm using this, right? Then because I have my near snap on, so I can kind of slide along right here, right? And pick, okay, well, roughly there's a line, you know, maybe there's a line. Let's not do too many here. There's a line, and there's a line, okay? That allows me to do multiple copies, right, with a set of reference points, okay? I can do the same thing, let's say, if I select all of these, so hold down Shift, right, and you know, you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, select them one by one, or do what I did by just doing the boundary crossing selection, so you get them all at once. Right? Let's say copy. Okay. Now there's a vertical option here, so click on vertical, or you can just type V spacebar. Right, it's the same thing. The underline is what it usually correlates to. And in this case, right, I'm going to click on any of this, probably this corner, right? And what you'll see that it makes the copy, right, only go in the vertical direction. It's constrained to the vertical direction, right? So I can use this as a way to snap to specific heights. Let's say I want all of these to be here, or I want all of these to be snapping to the top portion, right, of this box that I made. So I can click on that corner. You'll see that's once, right? I can do it twice. I can do it 4 times before I enter or right click to exit, right, the command. Okay, so that's a really quick and easy way to set out a grid like this, right? Now, this is a little bit overkill. I'm just showing you it this way, but I'm going to take these guys and delete them. So just click on, type on delete, right? Those are only the ones I want right now, right, that are kind of overlapping, right? Now, same thing with this, right? You can take any of these lines and just like copy and pick like an intersection point and say, okay, well, let me copy it to this edge over here, this edge over here, this edge, right? Which starts kind of, right, constrain and bound my larger, let's say, box or volume there, right? So you're starting to build up a network of linear elements, right? Or registration lines. These are actually pretty similar too, okay? Really quick, right? I was just kind of going forward with everything, right? I didn't really organize, but this is actually a good time to check that, okay, well, the diagram things are on the right layer, right? My lines are on the right layer. My planes are on this layer, right? So everything that's a plane is on this sort of pink thing. Oops, clicked on that by accident, okay? So most of that is like working out, all right? Okay, now, now, some of this might kind of project further than we want, because it's sort of like how we tell you guys when you're kind of building your models, right? You might want to build things, you know, leave your linears longer. Eventually, if we want to come back, we can come trim them, right? So the same way, like let's say we can use this, right, old kind of frame as the trim box or the trim command if we wanted to, right? So you can select it, pre-select it, and type trim. Right, then it automatically knows that you're using, right, that box as the input for the trimming geometry, and asks you for select object to trim. So I can select these guys, so like those get trimmed off, for example, right, or these get trimmed off. Okay, you can select them all at once if you want to, right? So using the boundary crossing selection will actually trim them all at once. Okay. How about things that are out here, right, in the air, right? So you can actually use a plane to trim if you wanted to. Okay, so let me just draw a new line on the ground somewhere else. You'll see that this is on the plans layer, right? So I can shift it over, change object layer to that if I wanted to. And extrude this upwards, right? So it makes a big plane that you can see intersects those two lines. Okay, so same thing, trim, right? Select cutting objects, this, right? Select object to trim this and this. Okay. Now, one kind of funny thing that happens depending on the view is that you'll get these sort of ends, right? Because it's actually using the back end as including the front as a trimming thing. So when you're trimming things using surfaces, it's actually better to go to like a top view and actually trim it here, right? So it's actually using the surface as the trimming boundary for these three-dimensional things. And I'll just delete this afterwards, okay? We can do that. Now that's one way of kind of dealing with this. But the next thing I'm going to show you actually sometimes can be quicker or faster or easier depending on what you're trying to do, is just most of the curves that we've been drawing here so far. If I actually copy one out, so I'll just copy one out over here. You'll see that when I click on it, it has little dots at the corners, right? Actually means that these are sub-objects that can be modified or manipulated. So I can click on them, right, and actually move them around, right? So actually click on it. So you'll see when I click on it first, the gumball is in the center. When I click on the point, the gumball moves to the point. So now I'm actually just editing the point itself, right? So this is a way of editing sub-objects. Now, when you have this highlighted, you can also, right, do a shift select, right? So shift select to select more than one and pull both together, right? Or if you wanted to add another one, then those are all three, like that. Okay, so that's kind of pretty straightforward. But what that means is that if, for example, if I want to change my length of these lines, right, then I can click on this guy and just kind of, click on this guy and just scoot it back. If I'm just eyeballing, right? If I'm just eyeballing it, then I just can click on the end grips and just scoot it back, right? The trim method works better if you're really trying to align something, right? If you're really trying to make sure it just aligns perfectly with, some other geometry. But if you're just editing to try to get it to do something, then that works as well. Now, the same thing actually holds true for some of these things. Let me just copy this guy out. Oops. Okay, copy that back. So for something like this, right, or let me draw just any of these kind of compound lines. This is what we call a polyline. It's a line that is joined together with several segments in it. Okay, generally you will be drawing with polylines as opposed to individual lines, but for now, we're just going to stick with this. Change it to the line layer, copy object to layer. Okay, so this is red. There's a second curve. Sorry, I should have done change object layer. Copy object to layer makes another copy and puts it on that layer, which is fine. I can select this stuff and I can click on my F10 key. So my F10 key, as you see, it's called the sort of PointsOn command, right? Turns on the editing points for any geometry that's can be edited that way, right? So in this case, I can actually just select these sort of points individually, right? And be able to edit them like that. Or in the case of a plane, I can edit the plane, right? I can stretch it, I can move it. If I try to move both sides at once, then I can do them at once, right? So these are kind of handy in the case that, oh, I just need to stretch this thing a little bit longer, right? Whether it's a specific distance or if I'm just kind of doing this intuitively, or I need to just select these two right over here and just make it wider, right? That's kind of what it's helpful or useful for. Escape basically escapes out of like your selection. Escape again escapes out of the point editing mode, right? And that now your points disappear, right? I can't do it that way anymore. Whenever I'm moving it, I'm moving the entire thing, right? And then moving the entire curve all together at once. Okay, so F10 just turns on kind of like the sub-editing points for whatever geometry you have selected. That's kind of helpful to know. All right. Okay, so copy box. Let me see if there's anything else. We've covered ortho, ExtrudeCrv, trim, scale. Okay, so the last kind of couple little things I want to show here, besides just kind of reinforcing that, use your object snaps here, right? You can turn them on or off. Usually you will have the near snap off unless you're trying to do something on Rails like we were trying to do earlier, okay? The sort of lines, right? Because like the snaps are what kind of allow you to more precisely make sure things are actually joining to each other, right? So you should almost always be drawing with your O snaps on. You'll get a bit more kind of used to what these mean. Intersection, meaning that there's an apparent intersection. Perpendicular means I'm just drawing, let's say, a line from here to this line, and that is an apparent intersection, right? You can kind of move it around and figure out like what it might be doing for you. If I draw here, then this would be a perpendicular point, meaning that's a 90-degree right angle, right? That's what the perp PRP kind of snap does for you, right? So it's just kind of these sorts of things. Use that to your advantage. I think the last thing I want to cover here, actually, let's see, let's move this over. So I'm just going to embed this in here somewhere, right? So you'll see how like these sort of transparent ones, right, can be really helpful. These transparent type of diagrams, right, can be helpful for overlaying information in there, right? Now, one little trick here that's helpful to know in the layers menu is that since we have everything right in the diagrams layer on one layer already, let's assume right now I'm kind of happy with where things are, right? Or maybe I might move this down. So I'm gonna move vertical this guy and snap it to the top over here, right? I'm sliding it down so those sides match, right? Let's say something like this, okay? So like I'm okay with like how like my diagram sort of construct is. I can just go into my layers menu here and just lock it. So click on the little padlock over here, right? And what that does is actually makes it such that that layer, the diagram layer, can't be selected. It's still there. I can still use it as reference geometry. I think in fact I can still snap to it, right? You'll see that I can still use it as a point for object snaps, but I can't accidentally drag it or select it or delete it, right? So that makes it using it as a base really easy because now I can make sure I can be kind of, confident that I'm only working with either the planes or the lines, and it's not messing anything up, right? Let's say if I wanted to draw a line vertically, in this case, right, you can go to one of the side views, right, and you can just remember, right, you can start a command in one view and switch to a different view, okay? So for example, I'll start a line command, right, like somewhere here, and then I'll go into this view and just point it upwards, right, and you'll see that now naturally it will snap to like a vertical point, right? So but when I snap to an object, it goes in the diagonal. So be careful of that, right? Like when I snap to something like this, it's actually snapping to something that's kind of diagonally out in space, right? But if you stay out here, then this eventually is a vertical line, okay? So you can do that, or you can just find something vertical to snap to, right? So I'm snapping to here to here. I know this is vertical, right? So that line basically is going to be, oops, I just actually accidentally dragged it out. That line is going to be a vertical line, right? Obviously, you want to do these on the lines layer, so I'm going to change the object layer to lines. And you can tweak these colors however you see fit, just so that you can kind of maybe see better, right? If you prefer, let's say, blue lines, then we can do blue lines and change them, right? So it's a bit more contrasty with the pink. And we can move and copy these, for example, into some of these intersections. So I'm going to do that first and make sure it's moved there. Okay, and then move it vertically down right into the intersection. So you can kind of position it however you want, right? And once you're happy, right, because it's on an intersection, then I can just copy and use the intersection of these as points to just copy a bunch of them different places, right? Maybe at the corner of the boxes, right? Which now starts to give me a sort of roughly a more vertical matrix of things being kind of put together. Okay. All right. Now, last thing I'll show you here again is, for example, let's say if I made a really, really long box, and you can actually model this to actual dimensions. Let's say, so if I'm making a box, right? Let's say this is a linear element. So 1/4 inch linear, 0.25 by 1/8, so 0.125. And let's just make it really long, right? So this would be actually an equivalent basswood linear, and just turn it on its side, right? Maybe turn it 90 degrees in this way, so it's like in the tall direction. And I'll just move it and kind of align it to one of my larger linears here. Okay, and say we can, or one of our lines here. Actually, maybe let's move this to one of these, maybe lower down here, right? Okay. So we can look at that and say, okay, does that seem reasonable, right? Is it too big? Is it too small? Should I use a smaller linear? Maybe I can, cut it down, make it half the height or half the size, right? Just let it run long. It's not a big deal, right? If it's too long, or if it's not, you can always trim it. Eventually, we'll show you this kind of editing some of these things, right, in the next sort of session, right, how to do that. But if you get one that's a kind of reasonably the right size and length, then you can also use that, right, and just copy it, right. So you just want to make sure you're aware of which direction you're orienting it right now, right. I'm kind of orienting one direction. You have to decide, am I going to use the left corner, the right corner, or the middle point, right? The midpoint, right? In this case, I'll just use the midpoint for the next couple here. Okay. This one, copy it over. Okay. I can take 1, 2, 3, 4, right? Over these guys again. Okay. And then copy, let's say, that point to some of these things below, up there, right? So I start to kind of have a linear framework going, right? And you can easily take one of these guys, okay? Just copy it out, right? Copy it out to the side, turn it 90 degrees, okay? Then again, right, move it and align it with one of your lines here, right? So you start to kind of build, well, this is going to be an intersection, right? So that might tell you, okay, well, I need to actually move this up. So I'll just move vertically this way. It's crossing on top instead, right? All right. And then maybe that point over. This is a little bit haphazard. So I'm just kind of winging it right now, but right. So you can start to kind of see how this can help you build up a sort of model, right? That has linears, has volumes or masses, has planes and planar elements, right? That you can use. You can also kind of draw, let's say, side profiles first, right? Outside on the ground, maybe some ones that are more complex like this. Extrude them to do that, right? And then say, okay, well, actually, it's this orientation and maybe that orientation. No, actually, no, let's keep it this orientation, right? And then start to kind of move it in to see, right, how this might intersect with some of the other spaces. Okay, so this, let's see. Yeah, okay, let's see how that works. right? And we might have to adjust things a little bit, like get things to match a little bit better, et cetera, that kind of stuff, right? That you can start kind of see. And we can turn the diagrams off to see, oh, well, this is actually the spaces that I'm, ending up with, how they're kind of operating, how are they interacting with each other, right? And kind of work that way. Okay, so last thing is a question about, well, I did all this work in here. How do I get it out, right? So there are two parts to that question. The first, I'll tell you how to export out a view, meaning that I can do what's called ViewCaptureToFile. So this is the command. And what this does, you should actually have this transparent background off by default, is it basically screenshots, right, this view. I would suggest, however, you mess with the scale here, right? Make it something like 2 times the size if you have a smaller monitor. In my case, this makes it a 4,000 pixel wide image, which might be too big for posting to Miro. So I'll do 1.5 in my case, right? But use this multiplier to control, right, the pixel dimension of the output. Say okay, and just save it, right? Save, let's say, 01. Okay, and what you'll get is basically a screenshot, right? Albeit usually, right, if you do a higher pixel dimension, it will be a nicer screenshot, meaning that like if you zoom in, the pixels won't be as, right? This will be 1.5 times the size of your screen, or 2 times, depending on what you set it at. So literally what you see is what you get. Okay, now because of that, you might have to spend some time tweaking, right? Let's say in ghosted mode. This is ghosted mode. If you like, depending on what you're seeing and what you like, do you want to hide the curves or not? Let's say if I hide my curves, right? You can tweak a lot of the options that are present here in these view styles. So let's say under ghosted mode, I can keep on going. If I, again, right-clicking on here, going to the display options, you'll see, actually, I should restore this to default so you see, this is what ghosted mode usually looks like. Anything that's in purple means I've adjusted the values from default, right? Starting out. For example, ghosted mode looks like this, okay? And I might go, well, I don't like the gray background, right? So I can go here and change the background setting. So here on the background, go to solid color and change it to, let's say if it's completely white, you'll see what you get. The white kind of washes out because I'm not sure where the boundaries of my diagrams are anymore, right? So I'll choose the very light gray. So at least I can differentiate, right? And say, okay, that just changes this view style to that, right? And then you can kind of pick a better view that you like. Again, right, there are actually a lot more options here that you can play with. So I can decide, okay, under this view style, I don't want curves to show up, right? So in this case, let me compress this a little bit, right? Because I unclick show curves, right? All the curves just disappear just in this view style, right? Only in the ghosted mode, okay? Or, and there are other things, right? Do we want to show surface edges? So surface edge settings here, for example, the 2, if I make it 6, then your surface edges will become really chunky and nasty. If I make it 1, then it will become really thin and skinny, right? So these are actually just kind of a lot of settings you can play with in terms of that, or let's say object color. Let's say if I want a single color for everything, then I can assign gray to everything, right? So everything's just gray now, regardless of what its layer color is. There's transparency. I can control how transparent it is, et cetera, say okay, right? So control it that way. Let me, for example, here, I'll turn off the curves. And let's see, gloss, transparency, object edges, okay. All right, let's just say like we're happy with this, right? I showed you how to do the normal kind of export. There are some orthographic views here. So under here, right, set view, you have your normal top, bottom, left, right, blah, blah, perspective, right? There are also these isometric views, so northeast, northwest. These are your sort of standard axon views. So let's say southeast, right, gives me this view. usually what I do is I change it to the view, I select stuff, and I zoom select using my middle mouse button and kind of reframe it a little bit, right? And this is a 30-30 axon, right? So 30 degrees on each side, right? So this is what would be a standard axon view. If you turn it, it would still be in an axon in a parallel projection. That's why it says parallel there, but it won't be in like a standard 30-60 or 30-30, right? You would have to kind of line that up yourself, right? So this is kind of what an axonometric would look like. If you want to switch back, again, just click here, right click here, right, set view, perspective, brings you back to one of these perspective views. Okay, and then last thing, again, view export to file. If you don't want a background, right? Let's say if you're wanting to use this to composite onto something else, right? Then click on this transparent background option. It will give you this sort of checkerboard thing. However, when you save it, you have to save it as a PNG file. Otherwise, the transparency will be saved. Okay, so this will be view 2 as a PNG, and we can open it in Photoshop just to confirm. Right, so it doesn't have, right, it doesn't have a background, it doesn't have the gray, so this is the kind of file that's good for, that is good for compositing it into something else, right? Yeah, sometimes you might get weird stuff like this, depending. I think this is because the, yeah, this diagram thing itself has transparency, right? But it doesn't, you know, it doesn't realize that, right? So you might run into trouble when you have a transparent kind of bitmap in there as one of the planes. But you wouldn't have that trouble if you're turning the let's say the diagrams, whoops, the diagram layer off, right? And you're only exporting this, then you would be able to composite this into, right? Because this has a lot more in-betweens. So let's say that, make this twice as big, be more pixels, higher quality. Okay. Over, right? So you'll see that this has, right, transparency, and I can plop it onto any kind of background, right? Overlay for transparency as well. Okay. So that's a lot of stuff, I think, right? But you know, I think the idea is just to kind of get you guys acclimated. Just note or be aware, you know, as soon as you kind of change a different view style, then you know things go back to whatever that that kind of display style was for, right? So you can play around with some of these options to get what you like or what you prefer in terms of looks. I do like the Arctic style. The Arctic style does a sort of very kind of abstract whitish style. Again, you might have to change the background for the style to fit. I'll show you guys next time how to make your own custom styles as you kind of play around with it. Some of these are custom styles that I've set up, but you can just know that like a lot of these settings can be changed to make it look better or make it look like how you want it to. All right, I think that's it.